The man in the expensive black suit stood up so fast. His chair crashed to the floor with a loud clatter. All eyes turned toward him as his hand slammed on the table, rattling silverware and spilling a glass of wine. His voice boomed across the small, cozy diner. "Don't you dare speak to her like that." The rude customer, a red-faced man in a crumpled shirt, paused mid-yell. His words stuck in his throat. The waitress stood frozen, her notepad shaking in her hand, eyes wide with shock and fear. The millionaire moved between her and the rude man like a shield, his jaw clenched, eyes blazing. "You will apologize to her?" the millionaire said, his voice low now but no less powerful. "Or I'll make sure you never step foot in this place again. Ever." Gasps filled the room. No one had ever seen anything like it. The waitress blinked, stunned. She had no idea who this man was. This rich, powerful stranger who just defended her like a knight in a fairy tale. But what neither of them knew was that this single moment, this clash in a diner on an ordinary Tuesday morning, was the start of something far bigger than either of them could imagine. Something that would change both their lives forever. Something that would test them, break them, and then, maybe, bring them back together. But before all that happened, there was once a girl named Ella who worked the morning shift at Rosie's diner. Ella wiped the counter again, even though it was already clean. The morning crowd had thinned out, leaving behind only the smell of bacon, coffee, and syrup. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and sighed. Just another day. She glanced at the clock. 10:43 a.m. Her feet already ached, and her tips jar only had 4 crumpled dollars in it. Rent was due in a week. She hadn't even started her second job at the gas station yet. A loud honk from outside made her jump. Through the front window, she saw a sleek black car pull into the parking lot. It didn't belong here. The shiny sports car looked like something from a movie, not the cracked, potholed lot of Rosie's. Ella's brow furrowed as the car door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, sharp suit, dark sunglasses. His hair was slicked back, and even from the window he looked like someone important. Definitely not a regular. He stepped inside, and the bell above the door jingled softly. The chatter in the diner slowed. People glanced up from their pancakes and newspapers. Ella plastered on her best smile. "Good morning, sir. Sit wherever you'd like." He nodded once and chose the booth in the corner, the one near the window where sunlight spilled in like warm honey. She grabbed a menu and headed over. "Here you go," she said, setting the menu down. "Can I get you a coffee?" "Yes, thank you," he replied. His voice was smooth, calm, but his eyes, hidden behind those sunglasses, seemed to be watching everything. She poured him a cup, then left him to look over the menu. "Probably just a guy passing through," she mumbled to herself. Nothing special. But she was wrong. A few minutes later, as she took an order from an elderly couple, the bell over the door rang again. This time it was someone familiar. Mr. Halpern. He came in almost every week. Loud, rude, always with something to complain about. Ella had learned to smile through it all, though her stomach twisted whenever she saw him. He plopped himself into a booth near the Millionaire's, snapping his fingers like always. "Service," he barked. Ella hurried over, not wanting a scene. "Good morning, Mr. Halpern. What can I get you today?" He glared at her. "What took you so long? I've been sitting here forever. You just came in 2 minutes ago." "Excuse me?" he snapped. Ella swallowed her reply. "Sorry, sir. What would you like?" "The usual. And make it quick. And this time, try not to mess it up." She nodded, biting the inside of her cheek, and turned to go. "Wait," he said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Didn't your mom teach you how to smile? Or was she too busy running away?" The whole diner went silent. Ella froze mid-step. Her hands clenched the order pad. The words hit her like a slap. She didn't say anything. Couldn't. That's when the millionaire stood up. His chair fell over. His voice roared. And everything changed. Now the whole diner was watching, stunned. Mr. Halpern looked up at the millionaire, sneering. "Who do you think you are?" The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. He slammed it onto Halpern's table. "My name is Daniel Grayson," he said, "and I don't let cowards bully people who work hard for a living." Ella's mouth fell open. Daniel Grayson? The billionaire investor? The man who'd been on magazine covers, TV interviews, and Forbes lists? What was he doing in Rosie's diner? Mr. Halpern turned pale. The millionaire, Daniel, stepped closer, staring down the rude man like a hawk about to strike. "Apologize. Now." "I am sorry," Mr. Halpern mumbled, not meeting Ella's eyes. Daniel didn't move until the man got up and left the diner without another word. Ella just stood there, her heart pounding. Daniel turned to her and said gently, "Are you all right?" She nodded, too stunned to speak. Then he smiled, really smiled, for the first time. "Good, because I'm going to need someone smart to help me figure out this menu." Her laugh bubbled out before she could stop it. That's how it began. The millionaire saved a waitress, and neither of them knew. He'd also just found the love of his life. Later that same day, Ella stood behind the counter, mind racing. She could still hear Daniel's voice in her head. The way he'd looked at her. The way he'd stood up for her. No one had ever done that before. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A text from her best friend, Tara. "Did you really just get saved by Daniel Grayson?" Ella blinked. Wait, how did Tara know? She glanced around. A teenage girl at the back booth was whispering to her friend and holding up her phone. Were people already posting about it? Her heart raced. This wasn't just a rich guy passing through. This was something else. That's when the diner's front door opened again. Ella looked up and froze. 3 men in dark suits stepped in. They scanned the room like bodyguards. One of them walked straight to her. "Miss Ella Carter?" he asked. "Why, yes." He handed her a small envelope. "Mr. Grayson would like to invite you to dinner. Tonight." She stared at it. What?" "He said you'd know what it's about." Before she could reply, they left. Inside the envelope was a note. Handwritten. "Thank you for the coffee. Now let me return the favor." "Dinner?" "Daniel." Ella's hands shook. She hadn't even said 2 full sentences to the man. And now he wanted to see her again? She looked around at the now quiet diner. What was happening? Before she could open her mouth to say anything, the front window suddenly shattered with a deafening crash. A brick rolled across the floor, stopping at her feet. There was a note tied to it. Ella screamed. The room erupted in chaos. And everything changed again. The sound of shattering glass still echoed in Ella's ears as she stared down at the brick. Dust floated through the air like slow-motion snow, lit by sunlight streaming through the broken window. The diner fell silent again, this time out of fear. A few customers ducked under tables. Someone yelled, "Call the police!" The cook, Manny, rushed out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, his face pale. Ella stood frozen. The brick had stopped just inches from her foot. A dirty white envelope was tied to it with rough twine. Her hands trembled as she crouched and picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper. In thick black marker, someone had scrawled, "Stay away from him." Her heart nearly stopped. Manny came up beside her. "You okay?" I think so." Her voice was barely a whisper. He read the note over her shoulder, and his face darkened. "What kind of sick joke?" "It's not a joke," Ella said, her voice steadier now. "Someone's trying to scare me." "But why?" She didn't answer, because deep down she already had a feeling. This wasn't just about a rich man defending a waitress. This was about Daniel Grayson, and whoever threw that brick didn't want them anywhere near each other. Outside, someone shouted, "They're gone!" Whoever it was jumped in a car and sped off. The cops arrived 10 minutes later. Flashing red and blue lights painted the walls as officers took photos, asked questions, and sealed off the shattered window with yellow tape. Ella sat on a stool behind the counter, clutching the note, her coffee forgotten and cold. An officer knelt beside her. "You're lucky, ma'am. That could have seriously hurt someone." She nodded. "Do you know anyone who would want to threaten you?" She hesitated. "No, not me. But earlier today, someone very important came in here. Daniel Grayson. The officer raised an eyebrow. The Daniel Grayson? Yes. He's got enemies. That's for sure. Ella nodded again. He invited me to dinner tonight. The officer scribbled in his notebook. I'd be careful if I were you. This note's no prank. Someone went through a lot to send a message. As he walked away, her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from an unknown number. You're making a big mistake, Ella. She stared at it. Then, slowly, she deleted the message. By the time her shift ended, the diner had calmed down a little, though the broken window still left a ghostly chill in the air. Customers had trickled out, whispering and glancing back at Ella as if she'd become a magnet for trouble. She rode the bus home in silence, the city passing by in a blur of buildings, honking horns, and blinking traffic lights. Her small apartment on the 5th floor was even colder than usual. She tossed her keys onto the table and sank into the couch. Her mind raced. Who would threaten her over Daniel? She barely knew him, and why had he even invited her to dinner? Maybe it was just kindness. Maybe it meant nothing. But the way he'd looked at her, the way he stood up for her like he knew her, she'd never felt anything like it before. And now someone wanted her to back off. Her eyes drifted to the envelope on the coffee table. Daniel's invitation. She picked it up, reread the note. Thank you for the coffee. Now let me return the favor. Dinner? Daniel. She grabbed her phone and stared at the contact card one of the men had given her earlier. It was Daniel's assistant. She hesitated, then tapped the number. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, smooth and polite. Grayson office. This is Amelia. Hi. This is Ella Carter. Daniel, Mr. Grayson, invited me to dinner. Ah, yes. We've been expecting your call. A car will be waiting at 7:30. She checked the time. 6:12. What kind of place is it? She asked, suddenly nervous. Don't worry, Amelia said with a small smile in her voice. Mr. Grayson said to tell you it's not a fancy place. Just dress like yourself. At exactly 7:30, a sleek black car pulled up in front of her building. The driver stepped out and opened the door. Ella felt like she was stepping into a dream. The restaurant wasn't one of those giant luxury spots with chandeliers and golden menus. It was a quiet Italian place tucked away in a quiet alley, dimly lit with soft music and candles flickering on the tables. Daniel was already there, seated near the back. He stood when he saw her. You came, he said, smiling. I wasn't sure I should, she admitted. He gestured to the chair across from him. I'm glad you did. She sat down, still feeling like this was some kind of prank. Why me? Why invite me? Because you're the only person I've met in a long time who wasn't pretending. She looked at him. You don't even know me. He smiled again. Not yet. They talked. About nothing at first. Pancakes. Music. The time she dropped an entire tray of milkshakes on a birthday clown. He laughed harder than she thought billionaires could laugh. Then the tone shifted. I know about the brick, he said quietly. She froze. How? I have people. They monitor things. And you're important now. I'm a waitress. You were brave today. You didn't deserve what that man said. Or what happened after. She swallowed. Who do you think threw it? I have a few guesses, he said, his face darkening. Let's just say I've made some enemies. Ella looked down at her napkin. Then maybe I shouldn't be here. If this is dangerous. I can protect you, Daniel said, reaching across the table. His hand covered hers. Warm, steady. She looked up and realized she believed him. For the first time in years, she felt safe. And maybe even something more. Outside, someone stood in the shadows across the street, a phone pressed to their ear. They're together now, the voice whispered. Good, came the answer on the other end. Phase 2 begins tonight. The shadowed figure turned and disappeared into the dark alley, just as the first raindrops began to fall. The rain fell in soft sheets as Daniel and Ella stepped out of the restaurant. A valet held an umbrella over their heads, but neither of them seemed to notice the water. They were laughing, really laughing, as if the chaos of earlier didn't exist. as if they weren't being watched. But they were. The man in the alley, hidden behind a stack of crates, raised a camera lens. He zoomed in just as Daniel opened the car door for Ella. She smiled at him, touched his hand for a second too long, then slid into the back seat. Click. The flash was off. No one noticed. A shadow moved again. Not far away, someone else, leaning against a dark van, spoke quietly into a phone. They just left the restaurant. Want me to follow? The voice on the other end was gravelly. Cold. No. Let them have their night. We'll take care of her later. Then the line went dead. In the back of the car, Ella watched raindrops race each other down the window. She still couldn't believe any of this was real. Just this morning, she was wiping down tables and pouring coffee. Now she was sitting beside a billionaire who had single-handedly stood up to one of the rudest customers she'd ever dealt with. Want to go somewhere else? Daniel asked, loosening his tie. Somewhere quiet? She looked at him, raising a playful eyebrow. You're not about to lure me to a secret billionaire lair, are you? He chuckled. No dungeons, I promise. She laughed, shaking her head. I should probably go home. I have work in the morning. I had a feeling you'd say that, he said. Which is why I had your shift covered. Her jaw dropped. You what? I called Rosie's myself. Said you needed the day off. Don't worry. Manny said it was fine. He even winked and said, You go, Ella. She stared at him, speechless. You can't just do that, she said. But there was no real anger in her voice. I just did. Is this what rich people do when they like someone? Buy their time. His expression changed, softening. No, I just wanted more time with you. And I figured, maybe you wanted the same. She blushed and looked away. The car slowed. She peeked out the window, expecting some skyscraper or velvet rope club. Instead, she saw a small building surrounded by trees, tucked away from the road. It looked normal. What is this place? She asked. Daniel smiled. You'll see. Inside, the building was warm and cozy, with wooden floors and soft lighting. Books lined the walls. A fireplace crackled in the corner. A library? She asked, surprised. My favorite place, he said. This used to be an old bookstore. I bought it before they tore it down and turned it into a wine bar. Now it's just mine. You have your own private library? He nodded. It's where I think. Escape. No board meetings. No fake smiles. Just this. Ella walked slowly between the shelves, running her fingers along the spines of the books. She spotted classics, poetry, even old comic books. This is amazing, she whispered. He watched her as if memorizing every movement. I used to come here when I was a kid, he said quietly. We couldn't afford books, but the owner let me read for hours. Said I reminded him of himself. When he passed, I bought the place. Ella turned. You weren't always rich? He smiled. I was a dishwasher before I made my first investment. I know what it's like to be invisible. She looked down. Me too. Silence passed between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then she asked, Why me, Daniel? Out of all the women in the world, actresses, models, millionaires, why a waitress? He stepped closer. Because you didn't flinch. You didn't fake a laugh. You didn't try to impress me. You looked me in the eye and treated me like a person. Her throat tightened. No one's done that in a long time, he added. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her mouth. That's when the power went out. The lights blinked. The fireplace dimmed. And then darkness. Okay, Ella said slowly. Please tell me that happens often. Daniel frowned. It doesn't. A loud crash echoed outside. He moved instantly, pulling her behind a shelf. Stay down. Daniel, what is happening? I don't know, he whispered. Another crash. Then the sound of glass shattering. Ella covered her mouth. Footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor. Heavy. Slow. Daniel reached into a nearby cabinet and pulled out something small and silver. A security panic button. He pressed it. Help is coming, he said. But the footsteps were getting closer. Then a voice rang out through the dark. Hello, Mr. Grayson. We meet at last. Daniel's eyes narrowed. He recognized that voice. Who are you? He called out. You know who I am, the voice replied. And you know why I'm here. Ella clutched his arm. The footsteps stopped right around the corner. Give me the girl, the voice said, and I'll let you walk away. Daniel stood slowly, pulling Ella up beside him. Not happening, he said. A shadow appeared at the end of the aisle. Daniel stepped in front of her. Ella, he whispered. When I say run. No, she said. I'm not leaving you. Ella. The shadow lunged. Glass exploded. Daniel shoved Ella to the ground as a figure tackled him into a shelf. Books rained down like paper rainstorms. Ella screamed. The intruder pulled something from his jacket. Ella saw it glint in the dark. A knife. No! She shouted, grabbing a thick hardcover book and hurling it. It hit the man in the shoulder. He stumbled. Daniel punched him hard once, twice, and the man hit the floor with a groan. Sirens wailed in the distance. Ella's chest heaved as Daniel pulled her to her feet. Are you okay? He asked. I think so, she stammered. He turned to the man on the ground who was trying to crawl away. You're going to tell me everything, Daniel said. Too late. The man spat. You're already in it. The front doors burst open. Flashlights. Shouting. Police. They rushed in, weapons raised. The intruder was pinned to the floor. Daniel held Ella close as she trembled. One of the officers turned to them. You're lucky, he said grimly. We've been trying to catch this guy for months. Ella looked at the man on the floor. His eyes were locked on her. You should have stayed a waitress, he hissed. Then he smiled, and that smile chilled her to the bone. Ella didn't sleep that night, even with Daniel's private security parked outside her apartment. Even after the man who attacked them was taken away in handcuffs. Even with Daniel calling twice to check if she was okay. She lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying it all. The voice, the knife, the way the man had looked at her. Like she wasn't just a target. Like she was a threat. She finally drifted off just as the sun began to rise. But even her dreams weren't safe. In them, she was back in the dark library. Only this time, she was alone. And the shadow wasn't one man. It was many. When she woke, her phone had 6 missed calls. 3 from Tara. 2 from Daniel. 1 from an unknown number. She ignored the last one. Tara's texts were frantic. Girl, why is your face on the news? They're saying a guy tried to stab Daniel Grayson? In a bookstore? Tell me you're okay. Ella blinked. Her name was on the news? She switched on the TV. Sure enough, there it was, her photo pulled from her old social media, next to a picture of Daniel Grayson looking sharp in a suit. Waitress involved in attempted attack on Millionaire. The headline read. Sources say the attacker may have been targeting Grayson's unexpected companion, Ella Carter. She turned the volume down, her pulse pounding. This wasn't just a local story anymore. Now everyone knew her name. Everyone knew her face. Her world had just blown wide open, and not in the fairy tale way she'd hoped. Daniel showed up at her apartment 30 minutes later. No driver, no suit, just jeans, a hoodie, and that same calm, unreadable look in his eyes. I wanted to see for myself that you're okay, he said. Ella opened the door wider to let him in. You didn't tell me the whole truth, she said, arms crossed. He nodded slowly. No, I didn't. She waited. He sat down on the edge of her couch and let out a long breath. I've been getting threats for months. Anonymous letters, emails, phone calls that hang up. I thought it was about my business. But then they started mentioning people I was close to. Friends, employees, and now, you. Why didn't you tell the police? I did. They're investigating. But the people behind this, they're careful. Smart. Nothing ever leads back to them. Ella stared at him. And now I'm involved. I didn't mean for that to happen, he said quietly. But I'm going to fix it. How? She asked. He looked her in the eye. I want you to come with me. Stay somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't reach you. She hesitated. You mean, Leave everything? Just for a while, he said. Let things settle. The press will calm down. The police will do their job. And my job? She asked. My apartment? My life? I'll take care of everything. She shook her head, backing away a step. That's not how this works, Daniel. You don't just wave a magic checkbook and make it all better. I'm not trying to buy your life, Ella, he said, standing now. I'm trying to save it. They stood in silence, the air between them thick with all the things they weren't saying. I need time to think, she said finally. He nodded once. I'll give you time. Then he left. The next 2 days were a blur. Reporters started showing up at the diner. Tara called her crying after one shoved a camera in her face, asking if she knew about Ella and Daniel's secret relationship. Strangers online were posting pictures of her, commenting on her looks, making up wild stories. One headline even said she was Daniel's long-lost childhood sweetheart. It was too much. By the 3rd day, someone tried to break into her apartment. The lock was busted, the door hanging open. Luckily, she hadn't been home. That was the final straw. She packed a bag and called Daniel. I'm ready, she said. Where do I go? You don't, he replied. I'm coming to get you. They drove out of the city just before midnight. Ella stared out the window as the city lights faded behind them. Daniel didn't talk much, but his presence was steady, reassuring. After 2 hours, they turned down a gravel road lined with tall trees. At the end was a cabin. It was beautiful, remote, wrapped in silence and stars. Ella stepped inside and felt the tension in her chest loosen just a little. This is yours? She asked. My grandfather built it, he said. I used to come here when I needed to breathe. She walked to the fireplace, her fingers brushing a dusty picture frame. It showed a younger Daniel standing beside an older man with the same piercing eyes. He looks like you, she said. He raised me, Daniel replied. Taught me everything I know about survival, about staying grounded. Did he teach you how to charm waitresses too? Daniel smiled. No, that part one figured out on my own. She laughed for the first time in days. And just like that, the cold around her heart started to thaw. That night, she sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot cocoa. Daniel sat beside her, staring at the stars. Do you think we'll be okay? She asked. I don't know, he said honestly. But I promise I'll do everything I can to protect you. She looked over at him. Why me, Daniel? Really? He met her gaze. Because when I walked into that diner, I was looking for breakfast. And somehow, I found my future. Her breath caught. Before she could speak, a strange sound echoed from the woods. A faint click-click, like metal brushing against metal. Daniel stiffened. What was that? She whispered. He stood quickly, eyes scanning the darkness. Another sound. Closer. Crunch. A branch snapping underfoot. Then silence. Daniel reached into a drawer just inside the cabin door and pulled out a sleek black handgun. Stay here, he said, voice like stone. But Ella wasn't listening, because from the shadows of the trees, something moved. A red light flicked on. Then the whole forest lit up with floodlights. Voices shouted, Get down! We've got them! Daniel grabbed Ella and pushed her to the ground as armed men in tactical gear poured out of the woods. Helicopters roared overhead. Laser dots danced across the porch. Ella screamed. And then the world exploded into chaos. Hands where I can see them. Now! The booming voice tore through the night as armed men in black tactical gear swarmed the cabin. Red lasers flickered over Daniel's chest, Ella's face, and every shadow of the porch. Ella gasped, shielding her eyes from the blinding lights. Her heart thundered in her ears. Daniel slowly raised his hands, his jaw tight. This is a private residence. What the hell is going on? Step away from the woman, another voice barked. I'm not a hostage, Ella shouted. He's not hurting me. 2 soldiers ran forward, grabbing Daniel roughly by the arms. He didn't resist, but Ella saw the rage building behind his calm expression. Don't touch her, he growled. But another soldier had already seized Ella's wrist, pulling her to her feet and away from Daniel. "Wait, stop. You don't understand," she cried, struggling. "Quiet!" snapped a man in a black helmet. He turned to the others. "Secure the perimeter. No one leaves." The team moved with chilling precision. In minutes, Daniel was handcuffed and standing beside a black SUV, still flanked by 2 agents. Ella was pulled toward another vehicle. "Where are you taking him?" she shouted. The man beside her, clearly in charge, flipped up his visor. Cold gray eyes stared back at her. "Daniel Grayson is under investigation. National security concerns. He's being detained for questioning." "What? For what? He didn't do anything." "You're not safe with him," the man said flatly. "And if you know what's good for you, you'll keep your mouth shut." "No," she spat. "I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me what's going on." The man leaned closer, voice low. "There are things you don't understand. People in very powerful places want to make sure Daniel Grayson never sees daylight again." Ella's blood ran cold. "You're lying," she whispered. "Am I?" he replied. "Then why do you think someone tried to kill him?" He turned and motioned for them to take her to the secondary vehicle. Daniel's voice rang out from behind the soldiers. "Ella, don't trust them." "I won't," she shouted back, tears in her eyes. Then the van door slammed shut between them. The ride was silent. Ella sat between 2 stone-faced agents, her hands still trembling. Who were these people? FBI? Military? Something worse? She tried to speak several times, but every word felt stuck in her throat. She kept thinking about Daniel's face, calm even as they dragged him away. His warning echoed in her head. Don't trust them. The van took a hard turn and pulled into a long driveway lined with trees. Ahead, she saw a sleek, gray building, no signs, no windows, no logo. It wasn't a government building. It was a fortress. She was led inside, her feet echoing against the polished floors. Security cameras blinked from every corner. The air smelled like metal and fear. Finally, she was pushed into a cold interrogation room with nothing but a metal chair and a table. The door slammed shut behind her. She was alone. 20 minutes passed. Maybe more. Then the door opened. A woman in a gray suit walked in, a thin folder in her hand. She sat across from Ella and smiled like it was a job interview. "Miss Carter, I'm Agent Reeve. I'm here to help you." Ella folded her arms. "Then let me see Daniel." Reeve's smile didn't falter. "Let's talk first. About Mr. Grayson. About how much you really know him." "I know enough." "Do you?" She opened the folder and slid a photo across the table. It showed Daniel shaking hands with a man Ella didn't recognize. Grimy suit, scar across his neck, dark sunglasses even indoors. "This is Victor Malenko, arms dealer, drug trafficker, accused of funding 3 revolutions in the last 10 years. Ella stared at the photo. "What does that have to do with Daniel?" "That photo was taken 4 months ago, in Monaco, at a private yacht party." Ella swallowed. "That doesn't prove anything. Daniel meets a lot of people." Agent Reeve nodded, flipping the page. This time it was a bank statement. Millions of dollars being transferred into an anonymous offshore account. "Where did you think all that money came from?" she asked. "You really believe billionaires just work harder?" Ella's voice was barely a whisper. "He said he used to be poor, that he started with nothing." "He also said he'd protect you," Reeve said. "Look where you are now." Ella's heart twisted. Her mind raced, trying to piece everything together. Could Daniel really be involved in something criminal? No, it didn't feel right. He'd risked everything to protect her. That wasn't fake. "I want a lawyer," she said. Reeve's smile vanished. "We're not charging you with anything," she said flatly. "But if you keep defending him, you might become a target too." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality," Reeve said, rising. "Your life was simple before him. You had a job, friends, a quiet life. This," she gestured around the room, "is what being close to him gets you." Ella clenched her fists. Then I'll take this over quiet any day. Reeves stared at her for a long moment, then walked out. The door slammed shut again. Meanwhile, in another part of the facility, Daniel sat cuffed to a chair under harsh fluorescent lights. Two agents paced in front of him. One of them tossed a folder onto the table. "You're in deep, Grayson." Daniel stared back, unblinking. "I've been followed. Watched. You people know everything about me. So if you had something real, you'd have already charged me." The taller agent leaned in. "You think you're clever?" "I know I am." The other agent opened the folder. "She's not safe with you." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You lay one finger on her. Then cooperate," the agent said coldly. "Tell us what you and Malenko discussed on that yacht." Daniel said nothing, so they punched him. Hard. Hours passed. Then Daniel's door opened again. But this time it wasn't an agent. It was a man in a black coat with a silver pin on his lapel. A strange symbol Ella wouldn't have recognized even if she'd seen it. A wolf biting a coin. The man smiled at Daniel like an old friend. "I warned you," he said softly. Daniel's head lifted slowly. His lip was bleeding, but his eyes burned with fury. "You did," Daniel said. "But you forgot one thing." "What's that?" Daniel grinned through bloodied teeth. "I don't break." The man chuckled and leaned in close. "No, but the girl might." Daniel lunged, yanking at the cuffs. "Touch her and I'll bury you." But the man was already walking away, laughing. The door clicked shut, and somewhere, back in her cold room, Ella heard a scream echo through the vents. It wasn't Daniel's voice. It was someone else's. Something was happening in that building. Something she wasn't supposed to see. But Ella Carter had made up her mind. If they were going to try to break Daniel, she was going to break them first. The lights in Ella's room flickered. That scream, the one she'd heard echoing through the vents. It hadn't been close, but it had been real. It twisted through the metal walls and straight into her bones. She stood up, pacing. She wasn't going to sit here and wait to be someone's pawn. Daniel was somewhere in this building, and he needed her. "And I'm not just some scared waitress anymore," she told herself. She searched the small room for anything she could use. No windows, a steel door, a basic light fixture above. The table and chair were both bolted down. She ran her hands along the walls, looking for seams, switches, anything. Then she spotted it. A small vent, near the floor. It was barely big enough to fit her arm through, but she could feel cold air rushing from it. She knelt and leaned closer, and there it was again. Voices. One deep, cold voice. The same one from earlier, the man with the wolf and coin pin. "I want eyes on her room at all times. If she makes a move, shut it down." "She's just a waitress," said another voice. "She's more than that. He cares about her. That makes her valuable. And dangerous." Then came a sound that made Ella's blood run cold. Laughter. Low. Cruel. She backed away from the vent, her mind racing. "They think I'm weak. They think I'll break. Then let them underestimate me." Across the building, Daniel stared at the two-way mirror in his cell, knowing someone was behind it. Watching. Waiting. His wrists were raw from the cuffs. They hadn't asked him any real questions in hours. Just kept throwing photos and fake documents at him, trying to make him snap. He didn't, because all he thought about was Ella, where she was, if she was safe, and most of all, if she still believed in him. A sharp knock on the metal door interrupted his thoughts. Then the door opened. To his surprise, it wasn't another agent. It was her, Ella. Hair messy, face flushed, eyes wild with adrenaline. She stood there in the doorway like a storm about to explode. The two guards on either side of her looked uncertain, like they didn't even know why they were following her orders. Daniel stared. "Ella?" She marched straight up to him. "Get up." He blinked. "What? How did you?" "No time," she said, reaching into her back pocket and pulling out a stolen keycard. "I found a security terminal. It's chaos out there. Someone's been breaking into their files. The alarms are disabled. I've got maybe 5 minutes before they realize I'm not where I'm supposed to be." Daniel grinned. even as blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. "You broke out of an interrogation cell and hacked into their system?" "I borrowed a guard's tablet," she said. "And I watched 3 seasons of spy ops during the pandemic. Now move." She scanned the cuffs with the card. They clicked open. Daniel stood, rubbing his wrists. "You're amazing," he said. "You can tell me that after we don't die." They slipped out of the room, keeping to the shadows. The hallway outside was eerily empty. "Where's everyone?" Daniel whispered. "I think whoever's behind this is scared," Ella said. "I overheard them. Someone else is coming. They've got a boss. Someone higher than anyone here." Daniel stopped. "I know who it is." Ella looked up at him. "What?" He took a breath. "There's a group, private, powerful. They don't operate under any one government. I only ever heard whispers. They call themselves the Wolf Circle." Ella blinked. "That sounds like something from a sci-fi movie." "It's real. And they want control. They manipulate industries, crash economies, start wars. They see me as a threat because I've been quietly buying out companies they used to use to launder their power. And I guess dating a broke waitress wasn't part of their plan," Ella muttered. Daniel smiled grimly. "Exactly." They turned a corner and stopped. 3 guards stood at the end of the hallway, armed and ready. But they hadn't seen them yet. Daniel pulled Ella back. She whispered, "Now what?" Daniel looked up, then pointed to a ceiling panel. Up. The vents were narrow, but just wide enough to crawl through. Ella went first, Daniel close behind. Every movement echoed with creaks and groans, but the building was large, too large for the sound to carry far. Below them, they heard voices. Boots. The sound of someone typing furiously at a computer terminal. Then a phone call. "It's confirmed." The leak came from inside. "Grayson." "No. The girl. She's inside the system. She's not just bait anymore. She's a liability." The voice on the phone paused. "Terminate her." Ella froze. Daniel touched her ankle. "Keep moving," he whispered. They crawled further until Daniel tapped her again. "Here." They peered through a grate into a large room below, filled with monitors, screens, and files. Men and women in black suits barked orders, while maps and satellite images covered the walls. This was their command center. "This is where it all happens," Daniel whispered. "We expose this. They lose everything." Ella nodded, her heart racing. But then, bang! The grate under her foot gave way. She screamed and dropped right into the middle of the room. Guns turned instantly. "Don't move!" someone shouted. Daniel cursed and kicked the vent open, leaping down behind her. Within seconds, they were surrounded. Red dots on their chests. Agents with tasers and rifles. Daniel pulled Ella behind him. Then the voice returned. The same man in the black coat with the wolf and coin pin, clapping slowly as he stepped forward. "Bravo," he said. "Really? I didn't think you'd make it this far." Ella glared. "What do you want?" He smiled. "To make you an offer." Daniel growled. "We're not interested." "Oh, but she might be." He turned to Ella. "You walk away now. I wipe your record. Clear your name. Give you a new identity. You go back to your little life. Safe. Normal." Ella's jaw clenched. "And what about him?" "He'll be gone. Quietly. You'll never hear from him again. But you'll live. You'll be free." She didn't speak. He stepped closer. "You think this man is your future? He's a war. And if you stay beside him, you'll burn too." Ella looked at Daniel, then back at the man, and laughed. A short, sharp, fearless laugh. "You don't get to decide who I love." Then she grabbed the nearest metal tray from a desk and threw it straight at his head. Chaos erupted. Daniel punched the nearest guard. Ella ducked as bullets slammed into the wall behind her. Screams. Fists. Smoke. They ran, darting through the chaos, ducking between monitors and desks. Alarms blared. A door opened ahead, daylight. The exit. They were almost there when, bang! Daniel shouted. Ella turned and saw him stumble. Blood. He'd been shot. She screamed. He fell to one knee, clutching his side. No and oh, she cried, rushing to him. The guards were coming again. They didn't have time. Ella grabbed him. Come on. You're not dying here, she said, her voice shaking. Daniel looked at her, pain in his eyes. Run. I'm not leaving you. Another explosion rocked the room. Ella pulled his arm over her shoulder, dragging him toward the door, step by step. Behind them, the building burned. Ahead of them, trees. A getaway vehicle. Freedom. But Daniel's eyes were closing, and Ella didn't know if they were going to make it out alive. Ella ran like she'd never run before. Every branch slapped her skin. Her boots sank into mud. Her lungs burned. Daniel leaned heavily on her, bleeding, his breath short and ragged. His weight slowed them down, but she wouldn't let go. Not for anything. Not even with the forest behind them exploding in red fire and black smoke. Just a little further, she gasped. There's a road. There has to be a road. Daniel didn't respond. His eyes fluttered. No, she growled. You stay with me, Daniel Grayson. You don't get to check out now. Somewhere behind them, voices echoed through the trees. Dogs barked. More boots pounded the earth. The Wolf Circle soldiers weren't done. They were hunting. Ella's eyes scanned the darkness. Her mind raced. Then headlights. Faint. Distant. She dragged him toward the light. A small service road appeared through the trees. And just like a miracle, a rusty old truck came rattling around the bend. Its headlights bounced off the tree trunks. An old man with a flannel shirt and thick glasses squinted through the windshield. Ella stumbled into the road, waving frantically. Stop! Please, stop! The truck screeched to a halt. The man leaned out wide-eyed. You all right, miss? Is that man hurt? He's shot, she said, voice cracking. Please, we need help. We're being chased. That was all it took. The man jumped out, helped her heave Daniel into the back seat, then floored the gas. The truck roared down the road, bouncing over potholes. In the rearview mirror, Ella saw the shadows spill out of the forest behind them. But they were too late. They were gone. For now. They made it to the nearest town, Maple Creek. A quiet place with 2 traffic lights, a single diner, and a medical clinic that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. The old man, his name was Hank, explained things quickly to the clinic's nurse while Ella held pressure on Daniel's side. His shirt was soaked in blood, but he was still breathing. Barely. The nurse rushed them inside. A tired-looking doctor barked orders and sent Hank back out to the truck. Ella sat in a plastic chair outside the small operating room for hours, staring at the floor. She didn't notice her hands were shaking until a nurse gave her a blanket and a cup of coffee. He's strong, the nurse said softly. He's got a fighting chance. Ella nodded, but didn't trust herself to speak. Her whole body was numb, except her heart, which felt like it might split in two. She'd never felt so helpless, so angry. They'd tried to kill him. They shot him. And it was all because he had the nerve to stand up to monsters in suits. Because he'd fallen for her. Daniel woke up hours later, groggy, stitched up and still weak, but alive. When he saw her face leaning over him, he smiled crookedly. I knew you'd get us out. Ella laughed and cried all at once, burying her face in his shoulder. You idiot, she sobbed. You scared me half to death. He touched her hair. I'm not going anywhere. You better not, she whispered. Where are we? Small town. Off the grid. They don't know where we are. We're safe for now. Daniel's eyes darkened. They'll find us. I know. We need to take this to the public. Ella pulled back, meeting his eyes. What? Expose them. The Wolf Circle. Their blackmail, their lies, their reach. How? We don't have proof. I have some, Daniel said. Backups. Buried. Off-site servers. Just in case this ever happened. Ella blinked. Wait. You always knew they might come after you? I knew they'd try. I just didn't think they'd go after you. He clenched his jaw. That's on me. No, she said, gripping his hand. That's on them. And you're right. We have to fight back. Daniel smiled faintly. You sure you didn't grow up in the CIA? She laughed. I grew up in diners and laundromats. You just bring out my dangerous side. Later that night, while Daniel slept, Ella stepped outside the clinic. Stars burned bright above her. The quiet was almost painful. She walked behind the building, just needing air, space to think. Then a shadow stepped out from behind a dumpster. Ella froze. It was a woman, early 30s, pale blonde hair, all black clothes, no weapons in hand, but something about her felt sharp. Ella reached for the pocketknife Daniel had given her. "Don't bother," the woman said. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it out of the woods." Ella's throat went dry. "Who are you?" "I'm not your enemy. Not tonight." "Then what do you want?" The woman reached into her coat slowly and pulled out a flash drive. She tossed it to Ella. "I've been watching them for years," she said. "The Wolf Circle. I used to work for one of their shell companies. They think I'm dead." Ella stared at the drive in her hand. "What's on this?" "Proof. Financial records. Names. Operations. Everything." "Why give this to me?" The woman smiled faintly. "Because you're a nobody. That's your power. They see Daniel. They don't see you. Use that." She turned to leave, disappearing into the shadows. Ella called after her. "What's your name?" The woman paused. "Call me Ash." Then she vanished. Inside, Daniel sat up when Ella returned. "You okay?" he asked. "I just met a ghost," she said. She handed him the flash drive. His eyes widened. "Where did you get this?" "From someone who wants to burn the Wolf Circle to the ground." Daniel took the drive with shaking hands. "This is it," he whispered. This could be everything." Ella nodded. "We still need to find a way to release it. Somewhere it can't be buried or erased." Daniel looked at her. "There's one person who can help," he said. "He used to work for them. Now he's hiding in the Swiss Alps." Ella blinked. "We're going to Switzerland?" He smiled. "We are." She exhaled. "Okay, fine. But I'm picking the hotel this time." They both laughed, even through the weight of what was coming. Because they weren't running anymore. They were fighting back. Together. But hundreds of miles away, deep inside a dark office lined with leather-bound books and antique maps, a man in a red silk tie poured himself a glass of wine. He stared at a monitor showing grainy footage of Daniel and Ella escaping the burning facility. He raised a glass in toast. "To round 7, he whispered. Then he picked up a phone. "Activate the next team." A pause. "Yes, the girl too. She's not just a waitress anymore." He smiled. "She's the spark that's about to burn our empire to the ground." Snow crunched under Ella's boots as she stepped off the train platform. The cold Swiss air sliced through her coat, but it was sharp in a good way, clean, bracing, real. A reminder that she was still standing, still moving forward. Behind her, Daniel followed with a slight limp, bundled in a long black coat. The stitched wound in his side hadn't fully healed, but he insisted he could travel. "They'll expect us to hide," he'd said, "not to charge straight at them." Ella scanned the jagged mountains in the distance. The peaks looked like teeth, white and dangerous. "Remind me why we didn't fly?" she asked, shivering. Daniel smiled faintly. "Too easy to track. Trains and feet are harder." "Right?" she muttered. "Secret billionaires and their survival skills." He nudged her shoulder. "You love it." She blushed. "I'm starting to." They crossed a quiet town square and climbed into a narrow mountain vehicle. A boxy, noisy thing that looked like it hadn't been serviced since the early 2000s. The driver didn't speak. He just nodded once, then started up the winding trail into the mountains. Ella looked at Daniel. "This contact of yours. You trust him?" Daniel's smile faded. "No, but I need him." "Great," she said. "What could possibly go wrong?" They arrived an hour later at a hidden chalet carved into the side of a mountain. From the outside, it looked abandoned. No signs, no satellite dishes, not even a mailbox. Daniel led the way up a steep stairwell, then knocked 5 times in a strange rhythm. Knock, pause, knock knock, pause, knock. Nothing. Then the door opened a crack. A pale man with long white hair and round glasses peered out. His eyes narrowed when he saw Daniel. "I thought you were dead." "Not yet," Daniel said. "May we come in?" The man sighed and opened the door. "You never bring guests." Daniel gestured to Ella. "This is Ella Carter." "Ah, the waitress." He eyed her up and down. "Much prettier than I expected." Ella arched an eyebrow. "Charmed." The man chuckled. "Come, before someone follows your trail." Inside, the chalet was warm and dark, lit by lamps and old candles. Dozens of books and monitors were stacked around the room, along with maps, photographs, and files pinned to every wall. "This is Lucas Harbin," Daniel told her. "He used to run the Wolf Circle's information network. Until he flipped." Lucas poured tea into old mismatched cups. "Flipped is a strong word. I saw what they really wanted. Power without consequence. That's not strategy. That's madness." Daniel slid the flash drive across the table. "We need your help. Can you decrypt this and get it out to the world?" Lucas studied the drive like it might explode. "Where did you get this?" "A woman," Ella said. "She called herself Ash. Said she used to work for one of their shell companies." Lucas paled. "Ash is alive? You know her?" "I trained her. She was the best we had. Then she vanished." He plugged the drive into a secured terminal. Code flashed across the screen like rain. Lucas muttered to himself as he typed, scanning through files. This is everything. Names, accounts, kill orders, blackmail campaigns, even their government contracts. If this goes public," he looked up at them, "they'll be finished." Daniel nodded. "That's the plan." But Lucas didn't look relieved. He looked afraid. "They'll come for you," he said. "For all of us. You're not just exposing them. You're declaring war." Ella looked at Daniel. "Then let's make it loud." Lucas smiled bitterly. Spoken like Ash. 3 hours later, Lucas was still working. Ella stepped out onto the balcony for air. The mountain was silent. Snowflakes drifted down like ash. She closed her eyes. Then she heard it. A single crunch behind her. She turned, just in time to see a masked figure drop from the rooftop and tackle her to the ground. She hit the wood hard, the breath knocked out of her. The attacker was fast, heavy. They pinned her down, a gloved hand clamping over her mouth. Then she saw the glint of a blade. Her scream never made it out. But then, crack, the attacker's body jerked sideways. A second gunshot followed. Daniel. He rushed out with Lucas behind him, holding a small pistol. The attacker scrambled to his feet and leapt off the balcony, vanishing into the snow. Ella gasped for air, shaking. Daniel dropped beside her, checking her. "You okay? Did he hurt you?" I'm fine," she said, heart pounding. "He didn't get the drive?" "No. Lucas still has it." They hurried back inside. Lucas was already locking down the computers. "They're here," he said. "We triggered something. An alert. The system is compromised." "Can you finish the upload?" Daniel asked. Lucas nodded. "Yes, but not from here. I need to route through something bigger. Something public. Something untouchable." Ella thought for a second. "What about an international conference? Like a tech summit? Broadcast it live. Somewhere secure. Somewhere full of press." Daniel's eyes lit up. "Geneva. The Global AI Summit. Every major news outlet will be there. And the Wolf Circle has ties to half the companies presenting." Lucas smirked. "Perfect." Daniel grabbed Ella's hand. "We move at dawn." But Ella's expression was tight. "What is it?" Daniel asked. She turned toward the dark woods beyond the balcony. "That man was here to kill me," she said softly. "Not you. Me." Daniel didn't respond, because he knew she was right. They weren't just trying to silence the whistleblower anymore. They were hunting the girl who lit the match. In the heart of London, a glass tower loomed above the fog. Inside, 12 people sat at a long obsidian table. Each one wore a silver pin with a wolf biting a coin. The man at the head of the table watched a screen showing Daniel, Ella, and Lucas gathered around a glowing monitor. "They have the files," he said. A woman beside him raised an eyebrow. "Why haven't we eliminated them?" "We tried," the man growled. "They survived. And now they're planning to expose us at the global summit." Murmurs filled the room. The woman leaned back in her chair. "Then we kill them before they get there." The man stood, his voice cold. "No. We do worse." He pointed to a folder on the table. Inside were surveillance photos of Ella at Rosie's diner, at the train station, at the cabin. "Let her get to the summit," he said. "Let her think she's won." A cruel smile spread across his face. "Then we tear her world apart." Back at the chalet, Ella sat beside Daniel on the bed. He reached for her hand. "Are you scared?" She nodded. "Terrified." He kissed her forehead. "Me too." She looked at him, tears threatening to spill. "Promise me something?" "Anything. If something happens to me, if I don't make it." "Stop," he said, voice thick. "We both make it. Or we don't go." But she gripped his hand tighter. "No. Promise me. You finish this." Daniel's jaw clenched. "I don't want a world without you in it." She smiled sadly. "Then let's make one worth living in." And as the first light of dawn broke across the snowy Alps, Ella and Daniel held each other close, unaware that across the world the final trap was already being set. The icy wind cut through Geneva like knives. Cameras flashed. Reporters jostled against security barricades. Protesters chanted outside the convention center, waving signs about tech corruption and corporate secrets. The global AI summit had become the center of the world's attention, and that was exactly what Ella and Daniel needed. They arrived through the back entrance, disguised in plain black suits, ID badges forged by Lucas. The flash drive containing the Wolf Circle's secrets was hidden in Ella's coat, secured in a stitched pocket behind the lining. Only she and Daniel knew its exact location. "You sure this is going to work?" she whispered as they stepped into the vast, high-ceilinged expo hall buzzing with activity. Daniel glanced at her, face unreadable. "If it doesn't, we don't get a second shot." Around them, tech giants were setting up demos. Digital billboards glowed with buzzwords: autonomous security, global data sharing, innovation with integrity. Ella almost laughed at the irony. Daniel nodded toward a banner that read "Main Stage, Keynote Panel, Live Global Streaming, 2 p.m. Central European Time." "That's where we go live," he said. "Lucas is already in position. When we're on that stage, he'll connect to the summit's broadcast servers. And then," Daniel met her eyes, "then the whole world sees the truth." High above the crowd, in the rafters of the convention hall, two sharpshooters adjusted their scopes. One of them tapped an earpiece. Visual confirmed. "Grayson and Carter are inside." A cold voice responded, calm and precise. "Orders stand. They reach the stage, you take them out. Quietly. Clean. No mistakes." "Understood." From another tower across the street, cameras zoomed in. A team of data experts fed real-time facial recognition through AI filters, watching every move Ella made. At the heart of it all, the man with the wolf pin stood in a private control room with mirrored walls. He sipped espresso as he studied live feeds from 87 different angles. "They think they've won," he murmured. The woman beside him, tall and poised in a blood-red blazer, didn't look away from the screen. "They've always been clever," she said, "but never clever enough." The man's phone buzzed. A single message appeared. "Ash is in Geneva." He smiled. "Let the games begin." Inside the green room behind the stage, Lucas hunched over a slim laptop connected by a thick black cable to the venue's main server. Code streamed across the screen like flowing water. "I'm in," he said, fingers flying. "I've cloned their broadcast node. When you speak, the feed switches. The world gets everything." Ella took a deep breath. Her palms were sweating. Her heart was doing flips inside her chest. Daniel placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "I've never done anything like this before. You're braver than anyone I know." She looked at him. "If we die, I'm haunting you." He laughed. You'd be a terrifying ghost. Then the door opened. A stagehand peeked in. You're up next. 3 minutes. Ella pulled the flash drive from her coat and handed it to Lucas. Just in case I get shot. You're not getting shot, Lucas muttered. Then he paused. But just in case here. He handed her something small, a USB ring. Backup. Auto encrypts. Hidden channel. You press this, and everything uploads. Whether I'm alive or not. Ella stared at him. You think you're getting shot? He gave her a crooked smile. I plan for the worst. The lights dimmed. A roar of applause echoed from the main hall. Ella stepped onto the stage, Daniel right behind her. Blinding spotlights hit them instantly. Rows of cameras faced forward. And somewhere beyond those cameras, the world was watching. The moderator's voice rang out. Next up, Daniel Grayson and Ella Carter, here to talk about the truth behind AI transparency. Ella took her place at the podium. Her heart was hammering. She could see the red dot on her chest. Not from a camera, from a rifle scope. She exhaled, steadied herself, and spoke. My name is Ella Carter. I'm not a tech CEO. I'm not a politician. I was a waitress 2 weeks ago. And today, I stand here because I've seen what power looks like when no one's watching. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel stepped up beside her, voice calm and firm. There is a group that controls far more than you think. The Wolf Circle. They're not a conspiracy. They're real. And they're listening right now. At that exact moment, Lucas hit the switch. The big screens behind them lit up with document after document. Bank transfers, kill orders, political puppets, names, so many names, flashed across the screen. The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted. Security radios exploded with chatter. And above it all, gunfire. The first shot missed. The second didn't. Daniel staggered as the bullet tore into his shoulder. Screams erupted. Ella ducked as guards tackled her, trying to pull her off stage. But she shoved them away, crawling to Daniel. No, no, stay with me, she whispered, pressing her hands to the wound. He groaned. Just a scratch. Another shot. Glass exploded behind them. Then, boom. A deafening explosion shook the convention center. Smoke and screams filled the air. Someone had detonated a bomb near the entrance. Chaos erupted. Ella dragged Daniel behind the stage curtain. Her hands were covered in blood. Ella, Daniel gasped. You have to go. Get out. No. They'll kill you too. I don't care. Suddenly, hands pulled her up from behind. She swung wildly, ready to fight, but froze when she saw the face. Clad in black, hair tied back, blood on her sleeve. You want to live? She said. Come with me. Now. Ella looked down at Daniel. Go, he coughed. I'll hold them off. Tears filled her eyes. I love you. He smiled weakly. Took you long enough. Ash grabbed Ella's arm. They ran. Through the smoke. Through the chaos. Shots rang out behind them. One struck a guard. Another hit a camera. Ash led her through a service tunnel beneath the stage. Footsteps echoed behind them. They're not going to stop, Ella panted. Ash nodded. That's why we don't either. They burst into an alley, jumped into a black motorcycle already running. Ash handed her a helmet. You ever ridden one of these? Ella shook her head. Ash smirked. Good. Hang on. And with that, the bike roared into the Geneva night, disappearing into the blur of sirens and fire. Back inside the center, the man in the wolf pin stood in the middle of the ruined hall, watching news cameras capture every leaked document. Too late now. The world knew. But instead of rage, he smiled, because he still had one card left to play. He reached into his coat and pulled out a photo, a picture of Ella as a little girl, standing beside her mother. The woman had a familiar tattoo, the same wolf biting a coin. He whispered to himself, she has no idea who she really is. And then he vanished into the smoke. Snow whipped into Ella's face as the motorcycle raced along the edge of Lake Geneva. The world a blur of lights, sirens, and chaos behind them. Ash didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes were locked ahead, mouth set in a line of grim determination. Ella clung tightly, heart pounding. Not just from the escape, but from the bullet that had ripped through Daniel. "Please be alive," she whispered silently. "Please." Behind them, the sky still glowed red. The bomb had thrown the entire summit into pandemonium. But the mission had succeeded. The wolf circle had been exposed, live, to the whole world. Still, it hadn't stopped the bullets. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. Ash took a sharp turn down an unmarked road leading toward a dense forest. The motorcycle slowed and finally stopped near an abandoned ski patrol station, hidden beneath a thick blanket of snow. They climbed off. Ella stumbled slightly, her legs numb and shaking. Ash led her inside. The station was small, just a wood stove, a table, and 2 bunks. But it was quiet, safe, for now. Ella collapsed into a chair, removing her helmet with trembling hands. Her ears still rang. Her body buzzed with adrenaline and dread. "Daniel," she murmured. Ash knelt beside her, pulling a med kit from under the table. "He's strong. If he's alive, he'll find us." Ella's voice cracked. "You don't know that." Ash met her eyes. "You're right. I don't. But we don't have time to break down. Not now." Ella nodded slowly. She wiped her face with her sleeve, smearing blood and soot. Ash pulled something from her jacket pocket. Folded photo. "Found this at the summit," she said. "It was in the pocket of one of their dead operatives." She handed it to Ella. Ella unfolded it. Her heart stopped. It was a picture of her, age 8, standing in front of Rosie's diner, holding her mother's hand. But that wasn't the shocking part. Her mother had the same wolf and coin tattoo on her wrist. Ella's voice was barely a whisper. "That's not possible." Ash sat across from her. "You never knew?" Ella shook her head, tears forming again. "She left when I was 10. Said she had to go somewhere far away. She never explained. Never came back. I thought she was just done with me." Ash leaned forward. "Your mother was one of the Wolf Circle's inner operatives. Her name was Kira Fail." "No," Ella said. "No, her name was Marie Carter. That's the name she used to hide," Ash said gently. "She vanished from the circle. Faked her death. She didn't want that life anymore." Ella's hands were shaking. "So, what does that mean? That I'm one of them?" "No," Ash said. "It means you're the one they're afraid of." Ella blinked. Ash continued. "You carry her blood, her instincts, her mind. The circle doesn't fear people like Daniel. They fear someone from inside who can turn the system against them. That's you." Ella dropped the photo. Her whole life, everything, had been a lie? Ash stood. "We need to find your mother. She's alive. I have reason to believe she's in hiding. And if she joins us—" "I don't care about joining anyone," Ella snapped. "I just want Daniel. I want my life back." Ash nodded, calm. "Then you'll have to fight harder than ever. Because now, they don't just want you dead." She pointed to the photograph on the ground. "They want to erase you." Back in Geneva, Daniel was alive. Barely. He lay in a hospital bed, chest wrapped tight, for in his arm. The room was under armed guard. Lucas sat nearby, working silently on a secure laptop, eyes flicking between screens. "You shouldn't be awake," Lucas muttered without looking. Daniel groaned. "Where's Ella?" "She made it out." Ash took her. Daniel tried to sit up, wincing as pain stabbed through his side. "We need to go. Now. You've lost blood. You can't even walk." "Then crawl with me." Lucas turned to him slowly. "You're in no condition to do anything. Besides, we've got bigger problems." He clicked something on the laptop. A video appeared on the screen. A news anchor with too perfect hair and a forced smile. Anonymous sources now claim that Ella Carter, one of the whistleblowers at the AI summit, is not who she says she is. Leaked records suggest she may be connected to the very organization she exposed. Daniel's face went pale. "They're turning it on her." Lucas nodded. "Classic misdirection. Frame her as the traitor. Discredit everything. They'll hunt her. They already are. Daniel swung his legs over the bed. Then I'm done playing defense. He stood, nearly collapsing. Lucas caught him. You're going to tear your stitches, he warned. I'll sew new ones later. Daniel, you said you planned for the worst? Daniel asked, grabbing his coat. Then get your plan ready. He paused at the door. Because I'm not letting the woman I love take this fall alone. Hours later, in a snowy bunker hidden deep in the woods of northern Switzerland, Ella stared into a small mirror. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. Bruised, dirty, eyes too sharp to belong to someone ordinary. Ash entered, holding a burner phone. It's time. Ella took the phone and dialed the only number she still remembered by heart. It rang once, twice, then picked up. Ella, his voice nearly broke her. Daniel, I'm coming for you. I'm not who I thought I was, she whispered. I don't care. They framed me. They turned everything upside down. I know, he said gently, but we'll flip it right side up again. Together. Tears ran down her cheeks. I love you, she whispered. Good, Daniel said, because I have a plan, but it's going to take both of us. She exhaled, steadying herself. Then let's burn their world down. In a silent room in Istanbul, the man in the red silk tie poured himself another glass of wine. 100 screens surrounded him, news reports, satellite feeds, bank statements, facial recognition software tracking Ella's every move. A new message popped up on his screen. Subject located. Northern Switzerland. Preparing extraction. He smiled and clicked open a second file. A blurry surveillance photo of Kira Fail, Ella's mother, stepping out of a taxi in a small fishing village in Norway. 2 birds, he murmured. 1 bullet. Then he clicked send. Activate Omega Protocol. Targets. Ella Carter. Kira Fail. Daniel Grayson. Mission. Terminate with extreme prejudice. As the sun rose behind the Alps, Ella zipped her jacket and stepped out of the cabin. Ash stood waiting beside a snowmobile, engine running. Ella tightened the straps on her boots. Where are we going? Ash asked. Ella looked out at the mountains. To find my mother, she said. And to finish this. Because now it wasn't just about survival. It was about legacy. And the girl who used to serve coffee was about to become the Wolf Circle's worst nightmare. The fishing village was quiet. Snowflakes fell gently onto wooden docks and old boats that bobbed in the icy Norwegian waters. Seagulls called in the distance, and the smell of salt and smoke drifted from chimney tops. Ella stepped off the bus, her hood pulled low, eyes scanning every window, every shadow. Beside her, Ash adjusted her black backpack and looked out toward the sea. She's here, Ash said, pointing to a small cabin at the edge of the village, isolated from the rest. At least that's where the last signal traced her. But if your mother really was Wolf Circle, she won't be easy to approach. Ella's hands were already shaking, but not from the cold. It had been 16 years since her mother left. No letters, no calls, just gone. And now, somehow, she was alive and hiding in this frozen corner of the world. Ella swallowed hard. What if she doesn't want to see me? Ash glanced at her. Then we make her. They approached the cabin slowly. It was small, weathered. Smoke curled from the chimney, and fresh boot prints led to the door. Ella hesitated, then knocked. Once, twice, no answer. Ash looked around, tense. Something's not right. Ella's hand was on the doorknob when it swung open. A woman stood in the doorway, older now, but unmistakable. Sharp cheekbones, intense eyes, and a familiar scar along her jaw. Ella froze. The woman's expression didn't change. I wondered how long it would take them to send someone. Ella's voice cracked. Mom! Silence. Then the woman sighed. Get inside. Both of you. The cabin was dimly lit, warm, and filled with maps, weapons, radio equipment, and a small table stacked with coded notebooks. Kira Fail, Ella's mother, moved like a soldier. Calm, measured, dangerous. I knew the circle would eventually come, she said. But I didn't expect them to send my daughter. I'm not here for them, Ella said, stepping forward. I'm here for you. Kira sat down slowly, looking her daughter over like a puzzle she wasn't sure how to solve. You shouldn't have come, she said. You left me, Ella said, trying not to let the tears spill. You disappeared. No explanation. Just gone. I did it to protect you. You could have told me. I couldn't, Kira said quietly. They would have killed you. I was the highest-ranked intel operative inside the circle when I ran. No one leaves. Not really. Ash stood by the window watching the treeline. They know where she is. We have maybe hours. Kira didn't blink. Then we use it. Ella stepped forward. Help us. You know the circle. Their leaders. Their weaknesses. Kira looked at her. Why now? Why come back into this war? Ella met her gaze. Because I'm done running. Because Daniel's hurt. Because innocent people died. And because you raised a fighter, even if you didn't stick around to see it. Kira stared for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Then let's finish what I started. Meanwhile, Daniel Grayson stood at a snowy airfield in Bern, Switzerland, a fresh scar stitched across his shoulder and a duffel bag at his feet. Lucas stood beside him, scanning a tablet. They're in Norway, Lucas said. Ella, Ash, and, get this, her mother. Daniel raised an eyebrow. She's alive. Very. And apparently still deadly. Daniel zipped his coat. Then we go there. Now. Lucas frowned. I'm not sure that's wise. Daniel looked at him. Lucas, I just got shot in front of the world. I'm not in the mood to play careful. Lucas sighed. Fine. But you'll need backup. Daniel opened his phone. I already called in a favor. Lucas peered over his shoulder. That's your old mercenary contact. The one with the drone army? Daniel smirked. They owe me 2 favors. I'm cashing in both. Back in Norway, Kira laid out a hand-drawn map of the Wolf Circle's command structure. There's a summit in 4 days, she said. Not a public one. This is the real summit. The Wolf Circle's core leaders meet once every 3 years, face-to-face. Ultra-secure. Off-grid. Deep in Iceland. Ash nodded. I've heard of it. Thought it was just a rumor. It's real, Kira said. And if we take them out there, if we expose them on their own ground, it's over. Ella stared at the map. Then that's where we go. Kira looked at her. It's a suicide mission. Ella shrugged. So was the last one. Kira smiled. A tiny, proud flicker in her eyes. Then let's give them something to be afraid of. That night, Ella sat outside, staring up at the stars. Snowflakes clung to her lashes. Her breath came out in soft clouds. She heard the crunch of boots behind her, turned, and saw him, Daniel. He looked worn, tired, but very much alive. Ella ran to him, burying herself in his arms, holding him like she'd never let go. You're here, she breathed. I told you I would be. I thought you were. I'm not, he whispered. Because of you. He looked over her shoulder and saw Kira standing in the doorway, arms folded. That her? Ella nodded. That's her. Daniel smirked. She looks like trouble. She is. And for the first time in days, Ella smiled. But the moment didn't last long. Because deep in the forest, a flare lit the sky, green and burning. Ash stepped out of the trees, eyes wide. They've found us. Kira slammed the door shut and grabbed her rifle. We hold them off long enough to disappear. Daniel looked at Ella. No, she said. No. She stepped into the cabin and yanked the tablecloth off the table, revealing the hidden safe beneath. Inside were files, photos, old intel, everything Kira had collected on the circle for years. We don't run anymore, Ella said. We send a message. Ash raised an eyebrow. How? Ella pulled out one document, an invitation to the hidden Iceland summit, with access codes, and a name, the man with the red tie. By crashing their party. Hundreds of miles away, inside a sprawling facility carved into a volcano beneath Iceland's frozen core, 12 seats waited around a black glass table. Each seat had a nameplate. All of them had come, except one. The man in the red tie stood alone, staring into a screen. Footage from the Norway cabin streamed on loop. Ella, Ash, Kira, Daniel. "You're all so predictable," he said softly. He opened a small case beside him, revealing a silver box with blinking red lights. Inside was a tracking chip. He tapped the screen, and every wolf operative in Europe activated at once. "Let them come," he whispered. "They want to burn the circle down?" He smiled. "Then I'll burn with them, and take the whole world with me." The wind howled across Iceland's frozen wastelands like a living beast, tearing at the blacked-out helicopter as it dipped low toward a jagged cliff. Hidden beneath layers of rock and ice, nestled within a dormant volcano, lay the Wolf Circle's true throne room. This was no ordinary fortress. It was a bunker built for apocalypse, self-sustaining, nuclear-hardened, completely invisible to satellite tracking. A fortress for the wicked. Inside, 12 shadowy figures took their seats around a circular black table, unaware that for the first time in the Circle's history, a breach was coming, and the wolves were about to become the hunted. Ella stood at the edge of a glacial ridge, wind slicing across her face, body wrapped in insulated black gear. A high-tech mask covered her nose and mouth. The flash drive was strapped to her chest, beneath her layers. Not that it mattered now, because this wasn't about files anymore. This was about ending it. Below her, a small column of armored snowmobiles moved in perfect silence. Daniel, Ash, Lucas, and her mother Kira, each leading their own unit of allies. A ragtag team. Whistleblowers, ex-soldiers, burned spies, and rogue hackers, those who'd been hurt, betrayed, silenced by the Circle. Tonight, they fought back. "You ready?" Daniel's voice came through her earpiece. Ella's eyes locked onto the fortress ahead. "Let's take back the world." "Thought you'd say that." She smiled beneath her mask. Ash's voice broke in. "EMP drone deployed. Countdown to blackout. 5, 4. Inside the volcano, alarms began to blink. 3. The man in the red silk tie sipped his wine, watching Ella on the screen. 2. He smiled faintly. 1. Boom. The sky lit up with a blinding blue flash. Power across the compound died instantly. Lights, monitors, comms, all swallowed by darkness. In the chaos, Ella and her team launched forward. Snowmobiles screamed down the icy slope like wolves on the hunt. Spotlights tried to flicker back on, too late. Explosions erupted across the outer walls as Ash's team breached the perimeter. Lucas jammed communications. Kira led a frontal assault like a general possessed. And Ella? Ella charged straight through the front doors of hell. Inside, the halls were war zones. Gunfire echoed off steel walls, red warning lights blinking as soldiers scrambled to regain control. Daniel moved like a ghost through shadows, silenced pistol in hand, taking down guards one by one. He'd been here before years ago, when he'd been offered a seat at this very table. He'd refused. Now he was back. And this time he wasn't alone. Ella moved through the smoke and chaos, a blade in one hand, a pistol in the other. Her instincts guided her like muscle memory she didn't know she had. Because she was her mother's daughter. And the Circle had made a mistake. They should have killed her. Now it was too late. They reached the inner sanctum, the final room. The glass table, the 12 chairs, and the man in the red tie sitting in the center waiting for them. "You're very impressive," he said calm, as if nothing was burning down around him. "Your mother trained you well." Ella's breath caught. "You knew her. Better than you think." Kira stepped into the room behind Ella, gun raised. "You should be dead," she growled. The man turned, a slow, poisonous smile on his lips. "And you should have stayed gone, Kira. But here we are." He rose, pulling a sleek remote from his coat. "Before you kill me, you should know. This building is wired with a core bomb. Detonation wipes out everything in a 10-mile radius. That includes all our records, our secrets, and you." He pointed the remote at the ground. "Only one person can disarm it. Me." Kira stepped forward, shaking. "You're bluffing." He tapped a button. Somewhere deep beneath their feet, a low hum began to build. "No," he said. I'm winning. Ella stared at him. Why? You've lost. The world saw everything. Your empire is crumbling. He turned to her slowly. My empire is eternal. But you're just a waitress who got lucky. She stepped closer. Wrong, Ella said. I'm the storm you didn't see coming. Then she raised her pistol and fired. The bullet struck the remote dead on. It exploded in his hand, shredding his fingers. He screamed, falling to his knees, blood splattering the floor. Daniel grabbed the core bomb failsafe manual from a wall panel and tossed it to Lucas. Shut it down. Lucas dropped to his knees, flipping pages. I need 2 minutes. You have 1. Ash sealed the doors. They're coming. Gunfire pounded from the other side. Ella stood over the man in the red tie, heart pounding. You made me, she said. You built a world where people like you thrive, where people like my mom have to run, where people like me are disposable. He coughed blood. And what are you now? She leaned in. The end of your story. Then Kira pulled the trigger. 1 clean shot, and the Wolf Circle's leader slumped to the floor, dead. Minutes later, the core bomb was deactivated. Power was restored. The team broadcasted every file in the compound through Lucas's satellite uplink. Names, deals, assassinations, black sites, global corruption. It was undeniable, unstoppable. The world exploded with outrage. Within hours, leaders were arrested, accounts frozen, companies dissolved. The Wolf Circle was shattered. And Ella? She didn't go back to the diner. She didn't have to. 6 weeks later, Daniel stood beside Ella on a quiet beach in Italy, waves lapping at their feet. No bodyguards, no secrets, just peace. You know, he said, brushing sand from her cheek. You could have just given me my coffee order. She laughed. And missed all the drama? He smiled. What now? She looked out at the horizon. I think we build something better, safer, real. Daniel pulled her close. Together. Always. Behind them, Kira and Ash sat beneath an umbrella, sipping wine. Even Lucas was there, working on a laptop, probably leaking another politician's dirty secrets. The wolves were gone, and the world belonged to people who weren't afraid anymore. Ella had gone from serving breakfast to serving justice, and though the scars would remain, she had found her purpose and the love of her life, just like that Tuesday morning at Rosie's diner, when a millionaire stood up and everything changed forever.